Thank you, Randall, and thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk before this group. Uh, the amazing thing about the United States right now is we're now being recognized as an energy superpower. We are now the world's largest producer of natural gas, and we're set to become the world's largest producer of crude oil, and that's not far off. I talk a lot about offshore. People say, well, you're having such success onshore. Why do you want to move to the offshore? Why do you want to move to new regions? I get the same question when we talk about the Arctic, and fundamentally it's because of our energy reality. If you look domestically, Energy Information Administration, out of our Department of Energy, forecasts what our energy demands are going to be. And they forecast us out to 2040, and what these forecasts show is that as a country, we're going to need 12% more energy by the year 2040. And if you look at the makeup of that portfolio, there's going to be huge advancements in renewables. We truly do need all of the above approach. There's going to be huge advancements in efficiency, conservation, but fundamentally, just like today, 60% of our energy is going to come from oil and natural gas. And you compare that to globally. Globally, the world's going to have 2 billion more people. Globally, we're going to see demand for energy increase by 52%. And that means we as a country are competing with the rest of the world, which has these greater demand needs. You see India, Southeast Asia, China growing in their demand. Their economies are growing. They want their economies to thrive and to have these energy resources. So it's very important for us and for our industry to look to see where we can get the supply to feed the demand. That's why offshore Atlantic, offshore Pacific, Eastern Gulf of Mexico are important. Also why the U.S. Arctic and U.S. Alaskan regions is important, as well as the entire Arctic region. The entire Arctic is expected to hold about 90 billion barrels of oil. U.S. offshore Chukchi and Beaufort Seas are around 27 billion barrels of oil. From a gas standpoint, it's over 1,500 TCF of gas in the Arctic, and then about 130 TCF are expected to be in the U.S. Beaufort and Chukchi Seas. And you add to that what we have in the ANWR area, the coastal plain, not the entire region of ANWR. ANWR is about the size of South Carolina. Coastal plain is about the size of Delaware. The area of impact would be about the size of Dulles Airport, another 10 billion barrels of oil. So there's tremendous opportunity in a place like the U.S. Alaska region, as well as the full Arctic. And these are very long-term horizons that our industry looks on to make sure that we are pursuing development of energy that we know our society, our U.S., our global economies will need. So fundamentally, that's why we're looking at the Arctic, because the energy's there and we're going to need it. And what we like to talk about is having a balanced approach to energy production so that we can secure and harness the benefits, but do it in a way where it's safe and environmentally responsible, protecting our workers, protecting the public, and protecting the marine mammals, as well as the surface and subsurface environment of these Arctic conditions. But the benefits are plentiful. The studies coming out of some of the organizations and universities out of Alaska show that Alaska development could create 50,000 jobs. These are well-paying jobs. Typically, when you see jobs in the oil and gas sector, they pay about double what the industry average outside of the oil and gas industry would be. Jobs are always something that are on the top of all the polls we see. People want jobs. People want economic stimulus. So over the long term, it would create excellent opportunities. I think Senator Murkowski would talk a lot about the state of Alaska and how her state supports having this type of development. You look at something like TAPS, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. In 1988, we had production in Alaska of about 2 million barrels a day. Now it's down to about 500,000 barrels a day. So you look at strategic assets like TAPS and the need to make sure that we have continued throughput so those strategic assets remain viable. You look at national security. If you look at what's happening today, we've gone from 5 million barrels a day of oil in 2009 to over 9 million barrels a day production, and it continues to climb. That means our imports are down dramatically. Look at natural gas. 2008, we're expecting to import $100 billion worth of natural gas a year from Australia, West Africa, Middle East, and Russia. It's not happening at all. We're self-sufficient in natural gas. We're expecting to become a significant exporter of natural gas. These supplies that we produce here and that we put on the global market, or that we don't have to take from the global market, create excellent energy security and national security benefits for this country, because the more we produce here, the less we and the rest of the world have to rely upon Russia, Iran, Venezuela, those types of countries. And I'm going to point to the price of gasoline. If you look at what we're seeing at the pump and the price of crude oil, a lot of that is because of the increased production here in the United States. We're often told we wouldn't be able to impact the price of oil, the price of gasoline, but in fact we have. And if you look at a country like Venezuela, which relies on $140 crude oil. If you look at a country like Iran, $120 crude oil. If you look at a country like Russia, $100 a barrel crude oil. That's what they need crude oil to be at to maintain their governments, maintain their budgets, to maintain their militaries. So strategically, from a national security standpoint, we're in a much different position today because of our oil and natural gas production. But to maintain that momentum, to maintain our status as an energy superpower, I think we have to show the world that we are leaders in continuing to produce oil and natural gas here at home. And we have to be leaders in places like the Arctic, which is the other element of it, in looking at the energy boom we've seen from a shale gas development, a shale oil development, Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania. That's occurred in many respects because we have the engineering expertise, we have the technological know-how, we've got the brains, we've got the people who have shown the ability to find oil and gas in rocks that we never thought we'd be able to get out of. We have great rocks. You look at a piece of shale, you look at a piece of natural gas, you look at it and say, how the heck can we get oil and natural gas out of this? We found a way to do it. Found a way to go down 5,000 feet, go horizontally another 5,000 feet, and pump water and sand into it to break it open and create channels to allow it to flow. We're finding ways to go into the 30,000 feet of water in the offshore Gulf of Mexico, 10,000 feet of water, 10,000 feet of water, 30,000 feet below the seabed to find oil and natural gas, high temperature, high pressure environments. And we're finding ways, and we have found ways to develop oil and natural gas resources in the Arctic, but a lot of it is happening outside the United States. A lot of the development is occurring offshore Canada. We see developments off the Atlantic coast, off the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador, which may not be the dramatic types of very intense Arctic environments that a lot of development could occur in, but there are Arctic conditions that we're dealing with, and the key is that technology is being developed so that these platforms can handle a large iceberg running into them. The technology is being developed to operate in these icy type of conditions in the cold water, both from a prevention standpoint, from preventing an accident from occurring, from a intervention standpoint, being able to cap a leaking well, and from a response standpoint. The American ingenuity helps drive a lot of this, and from my personal standpoint, I think we are the ones who should be leading. So all those are reasons why I think it makes sense to do it, and I think from being grounded in what our energy realities are, we should be looking at opportunities to find and develop new energy resources. Well, then you get to the how. I think we have a pretty good system in the country for developing offshore resources, onshore resources. Onshore state governments do an excellent job. The state of Alaska has robust regulation and permitting. They have offshore development occurring in the Cook Inlet. They have a lot of development occurring all around, as we've seen from the fact that in 1988 they were developing 2 million barrels a day. A lot of this happens in state-controlled and state-regulated areas. Decades of experience that a state like Alaska has. If you look at the federal side, there are, as you are all aware, when you look at particularly offshore, there are about 30 statutes, 30 permits and approvals, about 90 regulatory subparts that apply. And a lot of that is planning, gathering the research, doing the assessment of the environmental impacts. So you do a 5-year program, you look at the environmental impacts, you look at the conditions that you would be operating in, you look at socioeconomic impacts on local communities, indigenous populations, you look at what the potential for prospective resources would be. You go through a long process. We're going through one now for the 2017 to 2022 program. Once you have the program developed under the Continental Shelf Lands Act, and you go through these environmental impact studies and these environmental impact scoping processes and come up with that environmental impact statement, and you have your final decision on where to lease. If Alaska is included in there, then you can have lease sales there. And currently, I believe the proposal we have on the table for the next one would include one lease sale in the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas at some point during that 5-year period. And then you tier your environmental impact statement. So you're not done with your environmental analysis. Then you do a specific environmental assessment of the development of those planning areas, the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas. And then once that is done, then they have a lease sale, and then companies purchase the leases, which have an expiration term, usually of about 10 years. And then the government's getting paid along the way, another benefit. These are great revenue generation activities for the government. Bonuses, rentals, royalties, these bring in billions of dollars to the government. But then individual companies that have to tailor their operations to Arctic conditions. And that is what we have seen in places like offshore Canada, offshore Russia. We've seen the tailoring, gathering the baseline information, identification of the risks, identification of the hazards, and tailoring and creating a system to make sure risks are mitigated. This is actually now a requirement when you're out there operating. Every company has to have a safety and environmental management system that does the bow tie. You identify the risks, you identify the potential consequences, and you develop the mitigation measures to eliminate the risks or create as low a risk as possible. These safety and environmental management systems that are required, you now have to have them audited by independent third party. You have to come out and you have to get essentially a certificate showing that not only you're going to comply with the regulations, which are for equipment, for procedures, for preventing accidents, for capping a leak, and for responding to a leak, but you have to have your own company's safety system audited, certified before you can really go out there and operate. So and then the company has to file for its exploration plan. Exploration plans get environmental assessment. Drilling and production plans, environmental assessment. All these are additional layers of assessment to determine whether or not a company has the plans in place to be able to operate in these conditions. And then, as I said, the regulations that apply. You have tremendous layers of regulations related to the equipment you have to have in place, the barriers that you're required to have in your well design. So the requirement now is that you have to have multiple redundant barriers in your well design so that any flow path has multiple barriers that would serve to protect and stop a potential leak from occurring. Capping stacks are a big change that we've seen in terms of requirements if you're going to be operating in the offshore. What we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico is that companies are members of capping stack type companies. They're called containment companies. Marine well containment company is one. Helix well containment group is another. So if you're going to operate, you have to have access to a stack that would be deployed within 24 hours to be able to shut in a well. And then the response requirements have been ramped up in terms of the capabilities you have to show to be able to respond with mechanical recovery, in situ burning, dispersants, those types of things. And then in Alaska, we know that the drilling window is short. It's open water season. It's generally from July to October, I believe. So that it's done in a window where we can actually do the operations and have the ability to respond. So that is added on to the experience. I think there have been hundreds of wells drilled in Alaskan waters in the U.S. OCS. I think there's been about 6,000 wells drilled altogether in Arctic conditions, 1,000 in offshore and in the Arctic conditions around the world. So there's a lot of experience there, but what it necessitates is continued research, continuous improvement, so that we have a balanced approach in place to harness the benefits, harness the opportunities, but to make sure that at the same time we're being protective of our workers, the public, as well as the marine environment. Thank you.